While millions of Venezuelans were screaming in the streets, while flags were waving and strangers were embracing each other in tears of joy, while the country was experiencing the kind of collective euphoria that only a national sports victory can produce, Delcy Rodríguez was in Miraflores Palace, quietly dismantling and rebuilding the entire power structure of a nation. And nobody noticed. That was the point. Let me walk you through exactly what happened in the last 24 hours, because what you're about to hear is not a political coincidence. It is a masterclass in distraction. It is the most sophisticated example of political sleight of hand that Latin America has witnessed in a generation, and the people who orchestrated it are counting on the fact that you're still too busy celebrating to look at what they did with their other hand. Venezuela's national baseball team just beat the United States 3-2 in the World Baseball Classic final. I want you to understand what that means emotionally for a Venezuelan. This is not just a sports result. This is a country that has spent years watching its best athletes flee to foreign leagues, watching its infrastructure collapse, watching its institutions hollow out. And suddenly, on the world stage, they beat the Americans. The symbolic weight of that victory, for a population that has suffered under sanctions, isolation, and economic destruction, is almost impossible to overstate. The streets erupted, and they were right to erupt. The joy was real. The pride was real. The tears were real. Delcy Rodríguez saw all of that coming, and she used every second of it. The morning after the victory, before the confetti had even settled, before the hangovers had cleared, she announced a national day of joy, an official public holiday, schools closed, government offices closed. The entire country was given permission, was actively encouraged, to stop everything and celebrate. The media covered nothing else. Social media was wall-to-wall with baseball highlights and flag graphics. Every television channel in Venezuela was running victory footage on loop. And in that window, in that carefully manufactured silence, where no journalist was watching and no opposition figure was paying attention, the regime executed 3 separate operations that would have triggered massive resistance, international condemnation, and street protests on any normal day. The first operation was the military purge. Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino Lopez, the man who had survived every political storm of the last decade, the general who was simultaneously the face of Maduro's military loyalty and the quiet guarantor of Venezuela's deepest strategic commitments to Russia and China, was removed from his position in the middle of the night. Along with him went an entire layer of the high command. Senior officers who had built their careers on the Venezuela-Russia-China military axis, generals whose loyalty was not to Washington, not to any transitional democratic process, but to the arms deals, the intelligence sharing agreements, and the financial arrangements that had kept the Maduro regime alive through years of American sanctions. These men were not removed because they committed crimes. They were not removed because a democratic process demanded accountability. They were removed because they were the wrong kind of loyalists for the new arrangement that is being constructed. Padrino Lopez's Venezuela was aligned with Moscow and Beijing. The Venezuela that Delcy Rodríguez is now building, with Washington's explicit blessing, needs a military that is aligned with American energy interests. What you are watching is not a democratic transition. It is a hostile corporate restructuring. The board is being replaced. The shareholders changed. The product, Venezuelan oil, stays exactly the same. Think about what this means for Russia and China. For years, they invested enormously in Venezuela. Military equipment, intelligence infrastructure, economic lifelines during the toughest sanction years. They did this because Venezuela was a strategic foothold in the Western Hemisphere, a counterbalance to American dominance in Latin America. And now, in a single night, while the Venezuelan population was distracted by a baseball score, every military figure who represented that investment was walked out the door. Moscow and Beijing just lost their entire Venezuelan network. Not through war, not through diplomacy, through a holiday. The second operation was the amnesty theater. The regime announced the release of 3,200 prisoners under what it called a sweeping amnesty law. The headlines around the world wrote themselves. Venezuela releases thousands, humanitarian gesture, sign of democratic opening. The international community responded with cautious optimism. Washington pointed to it as evidence that the transition process was working. But here is what the headline did not tell you. The United Nations, not a hostile actor, not a partisan outlet, but the United Nations, raised immediate alarms about the composition of that 3,200. The overwhelming majority of those released were common criminal offenders, people serving time for drug-related offenses, property crimes, administrative violations. The regime went through its prisons and released the people it was least inconvenienced by losing. The actual political prisoners, the opposition figures, the journalists, the human rights activists, the protest leaders, the military officers who refused orders remain exactly where they were, behind bars, in conditions that international organizations have described as torture. And here is the part that should make every Venezuelan and every democracy advocate furious. Those people are not being held because the regime forgot about them. They are being held deliberately, strategically, because they are the most valuable bargaining chips the regime possesses. Every political prisoner still in a Venezuelan jail is a future concession, a future moment at the negotiating table where Delcy Rodríguez can say, "I'll release this person, but I need something in return." The amnesty law was not a humanitarian gesture. It was inventory management. They cleared out the low-value stock and locked the vault tighter around the high-value assets. The third operation was the one happening behind the most carefully closed doors of all. While the streets celebrated and the purge executed and the amnesty theater played out for international cameras, a delegation of United States senators was inside Miraflores Palace having a conversation that no official press release will fully describe. The subject was oil. Specifically, the terms under which American energy companies will operate in Venezuela, the revenue structures that will govern PDVSA transactions going forward, and the political conditions, or deliberate lack thereof, that Washington is willing to accept in exchange for access to the largest proven oil reserves on the planet. I have spent months documenting the signals that this moment was coming, the Chevron license extensions, the softening language from Treasury officials, the carefully worded statements about pragmatic engagement, and now I'm watching it arrive in real time, dressed up in baseball celebrations and amnesty announcements, while the actual architecture of the deal gets constructed in rooms that cameras are not allowed to enter. This is the core contradiction that I need you to sit with, because it is the most important political reality in the Western Hemisphere right now. When the United States extracted Nicolas Maduro in January, the stated justification, the moral framework that made the operation acceptable to the international community, to democratic advocates, to the Venezuelan diaspora, was that this was about democracy, about ending authoritarianism, about giving the Venezuelan people the free and fair election they were robbed of on July 28th. That was the promise. That was the legitimizing narrative. What is actually being constructed is something entirely different. What is being constructed is Chavismo 3.0. The ideology is gone. The anti-imperialist rhetoric is gone. The Maduro family is gone. The Padrino Lopez generation is gone. But the fundamental structure, a small group of unelected figures controlling state resources, suppressing genuine political opposition, managing information through distraction and manipulation, and making strategic decisions in secret without democratic accountability, that structure is not only intact, it is being actively reinforced. The difference is that it now serves Washington's energy interests instead of Moscow's geopolitical ones. Delcy Rodríguez did not transform into a Democrat overnight. She transformed into a useful authoritarian, and in the calculus of great power politics, a useful authoritarian is infinitely preferable to an inconvenient one. The United States does not need Venezuela to be free. It needs Venezuela's oil to flow reliably into American-controlled supply chains at a moment when the Iran war is threatening Middle Eastern energy routes. Those are two completely different objectives, and only one of them is currently driving policy. The magician's rule is simple. Get the audience to look at your right hand. Your right hand is the baseball victory. Your right hand is the National Day of Joy. Your right hand is the amnesty announcement and the 3,200 released prisoners and the international headlines about democratic progress. Your right hand is beautiful and exciting and emotionally overwhelming and completely designed to consume every available unit of public attention. Your left hand is where the country is actually being sold. Padrino Lopez spent years protecting arrangements that no one in Washington approved of. Those arrangements are now terminated. The generals who enforced them are now gone. The oil fields they were protecting are now being reopened, not for the Venezuelan people, but for the energy corporations that need them. The political prisoners who could organize real opposition remain exactly where the regime needs them to remain. And the election that was promised, the democratic process that was supposed to be the entire point of the January operation, recedes a little further into the future with every oil license that gets signed and every useful institutional arrangement that gets quietly locked in. I am not telling you that the baseball victory was not real. I am not telling you that Venezuelans do not deserve to celebrate. I am telling you that the timing of every political decision in the last 24 hours was not accidental. Purging an entire military command, releasing a carefully curated group of prisoners, and hosting a closed-door oil negotiation with American senators on the exact same day, Your population is emotionally incapacitated by national euphoria is not coincidence. It is a strategy, coldly executed, meticulously timed, expertly packaged. The question every Venezuelan, every diaspora member, every person who supported January's operation because they believed it was about democracy should be asking right now is this: at what point does pragmatic engagement become complicity? At what point does Washington's willingness to work with Delcy Rodríguez become indistinguishable from its previous willingness to work with Maduro as long as the oil kept flowing? The wall of sanctions cracked for Venezuela's crude. The military was purged for American corporate access. The amnesty was staged for international headlines. And in Miraflores, behind closed doors, the real terms of Venezuela's future are being negotiated by people who were never elected to anything. The baseball score was 3-2, Venezuela over the United States. On the field, at least, Venezuela won. Everything else is still being counted.